So the T20 World Cup ended a couple of weeks ago, so what I'm going to do now is do a tier list of how every team in the tournament performed. The categories go from legendary, I'm talking about a tournament that fans are going to remember for like the next few decades, just a famous tournament. A great performance is just above average, solid showing is about average performance, disappointing is, well, just disappointing, and national disgrace is just an awful tournament, one that makes fans, disgusted with the team.
It's embarrassing. It's a disgrace.
That's probably a bit harsh, but yeah, pretty bad. So we'll start with Afghanistan. Basically a nation that I feel like has stalled a bit in recent years. They did have that great performance in the last tournament, making the semi-final, although they did get absolutely smashed in that. But they probably would have hoped to have made the Super 8 in this tournament, but they didn't quite do it. All their performances in this tournament were pretty good. They won the games that they should have won, and they were pretty competitive against New Zealand and South Africa. But they probably would have hoped to have got a win against one of them, considering the conditions would have suited them. But I think it's a solid showing from them. Just to follow up, I guess, the historic performance in the last edition with a good showing. That there's no shame in that from Afghanistan. And if you look at their team, most of their players are between like 24 and 27. So I am optimistic that they should be able to make an impact over the next couple of tournaments. And they could even break into that sort of traditional top 8 in cricket. Moving on to Australia, just national disgrace. Awful performance. Completely unacceptable to lose to Sri Lanka and Zimbabwe in the group stages, especially when you consider that both teams didn't go particularly well in the Super 8. I think both of them lost all their games in the Super 8, so yeah, Australia really should have done better. Honestly, should have been competing to win the tournament. I know there were injuries. Stark recently retired from T20 cricket. Cummins was injured. Hazelwood was injured. So yeah, pretty light on the bowling stocks. But even with the bowlers that we had, I don't think the selectors made the best decisions. I think Bartlett should have played against Zimbabwe in a match where we just struggled to get wickets. And Bartlett is quite an attacking opening bowler, where we opted for Dwarshuis, who is a decent bowler, but he's not really the kind of guy that can get wickets with a new ball. Then there was that whole farce with flying Steve Smith over and not even playing him, when in hindsight we probably would have needed him against Sri Lanka to prevent that batting collapse that we had. And I feel like that experiment that we've been going with having 7 ultra aggressive batsmen in the batting lineup sort of backfired in that tournament. Our best batting performer was probably Matt Renshaw in the middle overs, and you do need more of those types of players on those slower wickets that we played on in Sri Lanka. But yeah, really bad performance from Australia and definite national disgrace. Not that people in Australia really get, but Australian fans probably should care more about it. If cricket is to become a world game, it's going to be through T20 cricket. You're not going to be seeing teams like the USA or Italy, performing competitively in Test cricket. So I think Australia should care a bit more about the T20 World Cup. And yeah, it was a bad performance. Simple as that. All right, next up we have Canada. Oh, Canada. They were the lowest ranked team in their group, and they did lose all of their games. But no disgrace there for them. They were one of only 2 teams in this tournament to lose all of their games, but there were no floggings in there, and I think that's sort of the best you can hope for. If you're a team like Canada, they would have been hoping to get a win against one of the associate nations, but the margin didn't quite go their way against the United Arab Emirates. This is a downgrade on their last World Cup performance. They did manage to get a win in the last T20 World Cup, but they didn't get flogged at all, so I think that means it's a pretty solid performance. Also, Samra got 100. That's definitely a historic moment for them, so they do have something to remember the tournament by, even though they didn't get a win. And yeah, they played fine. All right, next up is England. Now, England, I think, should be very optimistic about their team, and I know that's very hard for English fans to do. They played really well in this World Cup. They were a little shaky in the first couple of games, but yeah, since then I thought they've been almost flawless, and they pushed India all the way in the semi-final, which I was very impressed with. And lots of great performances from young players like Jacob Bethel, Harry Brook. They both got hundreds. Will Jacks with 4 man in the match performances. He was really great with the bat and the ball. Even Rayan Ahmed was very good in their match against New Zealand that they had to win to top the group, although that ultimately matched them up with India in the semi-final, so maybe they shouldn't have won that game. But yeah, just a really strong performance, and I think the future of England cricket's in good hands. And I think they'll even go on to win the next Ashes, and I think they'll win a couple of tests in the next Australian Ashes series. I really think that they got a lot of good young players coming through, whereas Australia, on the other hand, are going to see a lot of retirements, and I just don't think we're ready to replace the current crop of players. Next up, we have India, and just an absolutely history-making tournament for India. They became the first team to win 3 T20 World Cups. They became the first team to win the T20 World Cup at home, and oh my god, the performances in the semi-final and the final, making 250 in both those games, I don't think anyone expected. I think the previous highest score in a World Cup final was like 178 before this game, and they smashed a lot of records in that final. I actually did a video about all the records that they broke. Be sure to check that out. Just contributions from all across the team. The main stars, Ishan Kishan with the bat at the start and Sanju Samson towards the end. Jasprit Bumrah taking wickets throughout. Varun Chakravarti was very good with the ball early in the tournament. Akshar Patel took a lot of crucial wickets late in the tournament. Just a great all-round performance from their squad. And that they performed well under pressure when it mattered. They were under pressure in their final Super 8 game against the West Indies, and they calmly chased down what was a pretty tricky total in the end. And look, you could say the only downside was not winning undefeated like they did in the last tournament, but I think the fact that they had a loss in there almost made it better. They had to be resilient. They had to fight back any doubts that people might have had on their team, and that's what they did. So legendary tournament, no doubt about it for me. So Ireland, another cricket nation that is kind of stalled recently. For me, this current crop of players just haven't had as many chances to play at the highest level of cricket compared to the previous generation of players, and that has a bit to do with the terrible decision by the ICC to reduce the One Day World Cup to 10 teams. It just stunts the development of cricket nations like Ireland, like Bangladesh, like Zimbabwe, and I think Ireland have suffered a bit for that, and they don't play too much test cricket either. Look, not a great World Cup performance. They didn't really challenge Australia or Sri Lanka, and I think considering that Zimbabwe beat both those teams, I think Ireland should probably be a little bit disappointed in themselves that they couldn't put up more of a fight in those games. They were robbed by the weather of a chance to sneak into the Super 8 if they beat Zimbabwe, but of course that game was rained out. So I'm going to go solid showing. If they played Zimbabwe and lost, it probably would have been a disappointment, but, you know, they had a bit of bad luck with the weather there, and, you know, that's how it can sometimes be in these tournaments. Next up, we have Italy. First ever ICC tournament, and they got their first ever win, and they played quite well. They were the lowest ranked team in the tournament, although I don't think that was a fair reflection of their actual ability. I think we're still figuring out how strong this Italian team are, and they played very well. They absolutely smashed Nepal. That was the only win they had in the tournament. They did give England a bit of a scare for a minute, and yeah, they had some great performance, particularly Ben Menenti. I think the Australian selectors might be watching that and maybe regretting not considering him for the Australian side, but he did very well for Italy, and yeah, I think it was a great performance. I believe they ended up with a positive net run rate. They would have hoped, if they got maybe a second win, I probably would have called it a legendary tournament, but yeah, they only got one, and yeah, I think it was a great performance. And Namibia, they were beaten pretty comfortably in all of their games, even against the associate members. And there wasn't really much to speak of in terms of individual performances. Gerard Erasmus did get 4 wickets against India, which was pretty impressive. And that's kind of what you hope for these associate nations, just that someone sort of stands out and puts up a good performance and just be competitive in your games where you can, and that wasn't really the case for Namibia, so I'd definitely put them under disappointing. Not going to go national disgrace for any of the associate members. In fact, that honestly, you can only really argue that for Australia and one other nation, which I'll talk about. So next up we have Nepal. Very hit or miss tournament. They played very well against England. They were probably on the verge of actually winning that game, but they couldn't quite stick the landing, and England got over the line. I believe it was a good performance by Will Jacks, again, to get them the win for that one. Would have hoped for a bit more from Lamachane, but Dipendra Singh Ari was a standout performer for them individually. They did get a win in the end against Scotland, so I believe all of the associates in that group managed to get at least one win to show for their World Cup They lost pretty convincingly to Italy, which they would have been disappointed with, but I think overall is a pretty solid showing from Nepal. I don't think they were really expected to do much more than they did. The Netherlands, I thought they played pretty respectably against the full member nations. They only lost by 17 runs to India, and Pakistan needed to wait until the final over to chase down their score. So they played pretty well. Their only win came against Namibia, and they weren't quite at their best in a loss to the USA. So again, I think it's another solid showing. They bowled quite well in the tournament, but no one really stood out in the batting department. There was only 150 for the entire team in the whole tournament, so they probably would have hoped for a bit more in the batting. And next, New Zealand. I think it was a great effort to even get in the final. I wasn't expecting it at all. Very shaky in the group stage, and even in the Super 8, they barely got through by the skin of their teeth in the Super 8. It was on net run rate because they lost to England by a very narrow margin, and they beat Sri Lanka by a bigger margin than Pakistan did. So that's why they got through the semi-final in the first place, and then shocked everyone with an amazing performance against South Africa and New Zealand. They just keep finding ways to get through the knockout stages of these tournaments. They definitely over-relied on their top order with the bat, and they probably would have hoped for a bit more from Mitch Santner with the ball, but look, I think for them to make the finals, even though they weren't playing their best cricket in the tournament, it's a great outcome for them to make the final, and probably the less said about their performance in the final, the better. Bit of a traumatic final loss for a very different reason to their 2019 final loss, but yeah, it is what it is. India are a very strong team, and hopefully New Zealand can bounce back from that. And next up is Oman, and oh man, they were really bad in this tournament. They were the worst team in this tournament, not gonna lie. I guess they were in the most difficult group for an associate nation because they were the only non-full member in their group, because they had Australia, Sri Lanka, and their third and fourth seeds were Ireland and Zimbabwe. But yeah, they really struggled in that group, and they were beaten pretty comfortably in all of those matches. So yeah, they would have gone in as underdog in all those matches, but I was expecting a bit of a better performance, to be honest. They have won T20 World Cup games before. They've won one game in each of their last two appearances, so it wouldn't be unreasonable to expect them to at least get one win. Maybe not against the teams that they were drawn against, but still probably a bit more was expected with the ball in the bat. They failed to make more than 140 in the whole tournament, and in each of the games where they did field first, they conceded over 220, and they ended up with the worst net run rate in the tournament of negative 4.8, but you can't really call it like a national disgrace because they're just massive underdogs and they got smashed. But it was a disappointing tournament. Pakistan. They did make it through to the Super 8 this time. In the last tournament, they were knocked out because they lost to the USA. They did beat the USA this time. They ended up in the same group as them again. A bit unlucky to be in the situation they were in the Super 8 itself. And look, I think they played okay. The margins just didn't go their way net run rate wise. They were put in a situation where they had to win by like 65 runs against Sri Lanka, and they got a good total, but yeah, they couldn't defend it, didn't get the best of the conditions in that match either. And honestly, I think if their match wasn't rated out against New Zealand, I think they would have beaten them, to be honest. I think their performances were fine. They did get beaten pretty easily by India, but it's a very strong Indian team. And they're actually very close to beating England, which would have put them through to the Super 8, but a brilliant 100 from Harry Brook got England over the line. And yeah, I think it was a solid showing from Pakistan, to be honest, but just got a little bit unlucky, as you can do in a tournament like this. Scotland, again, really consistent performances throughout the tournament. They did only manage to win one game though. Fairly narrow losses to both England and the West Indies, so yeah, just showing that they can compete with the big boys. They lost a close game to Nepal, and if they got that win and got a second win in the tournament, it probably would have been a great showing. But they only got just the one win, which came against Italy in the first game. So we'll put them right there. South Africa played exceptionally throughout the tournament. I really thought they were going to be going to the final against India. I think it would have been a much better final if they did go through. But yeah, pretty much 10 overs ruined their tournament. Just lost way too many wickets in that semi-final against New Zealand. Some might say it was a choke again, just South Africa choking again. And yeah, they were off their game when it really mattered. But yeah, it's unfortunate because they played very well throughout the tournament. They went unbeaten in the group stage. They beat India pretty convincingly, and it would have been really great to see a rematch of that in the final, but it wasn't to be. And I'll just call it a great performance from them because that's what it was, really. So now we have Sri Lanka. I had really high hopes for them after they beat Australia. Nasanka played that amazing innings. They were in their home conditions for the group stage. They would have got mostly home games up to the World Cup final. So I thought it was going to be a good tournament for them, but really, really poor in the Super 8, and also should have topped their group in the group stage had they just beaten Zimbabwe. And maybe the subsequent performances of Australia might have indicated that win was sort of just due to Australia being bad rather than them being good. And yeah, 2 massive batting collapses against England and New Zealand, chasing very chaseable scores. I thought they would have been able to dig out a better performance in their own conditions, but the England and New Zealand spinners, who aren't the most skillful spinners, were just too much for them. By the time they went to play Pakistan, they looked really deflated and didn't bowl well, although nearly chased down the total to get a win to cap off a Super 8, which I was really hoping they would get, but yeah. A disappointing campaign for Sri Lanka, in all honesty. It's now United Arab Emirates, another associate nation, and I think the rift between them and the full member nations was really evident. They got beaten pretty convincingly by South Africa and the West Indies, and the net run rate took a massive hit. Played much better against Afghanistan and Canada. They nearly beat Afghanistan, and they did actually beat Canada. And it was only their second T20 World Cup win ever, so it is historical in a way, and I think it was a pretty solid showing from them. And now we got the United States of America. So yeah, they surprised everyone in the last World Cup by making the Super 8, which actually gave them automatic qualification for this World Cup. They didn't get automatic qualification again due to not making the Super 8 this time, but they won both of the games that they should have won. They beat Canada, and they beat both the associate nations in their group, and yeah, they just fell short against the full member nations, India and Pakistan, which, you know, they weren't really expected to beat. Although what an upset it would have been if they beat Pakistan again. But 2 wins and a positive net run rate, that's a great showing from the USA again, and yeah, we'll see how good they can get, because that's 2 good T20 World Cup campaigns in a row. Really great performance from Shadley Van Schouwik. He got 4 wickets against India and Pakistan, and he actually nearly got the most wickets in the tournament, despite only playing 4 out of a possible 9 games. So amazing individual performance, and yeah, really good effort from USA again. Just a great performance. And then we got the West Indies. Again, they probably would have been disappointed to not make the semi-finals, but I think they played very well throughout the tournament. They won all of their group games because they beat England, and they had a really tough Super 8 group. Like, Group 1 was definitely the group of death, so to speak, and I think if West Indies had a bit of a fairer draw for the Super 8, they would have probably made the semis. Like, purely because they performed so admirably in the Super 8, pushing India all the way, and the only game that they really slipped up in was against South Africa, so I'm actually going to call it a great showing from the West Indies. Shimron Hetmar was a massive revelation for them with the bat, and I think it was just a good tournament for them. Just got a bit unfortunate. They were very close to pulling off probably one of the biggest upsets in the tournament, but they couldn't quite get over the line against India. And then finally, Zimbabwe. Look, if you've been paying attention to Zimbabwean cricket recently, you might have seen this coming. They've been playing a lot of test cricket, and they've had a very busy last year and a half, and they've got some good young players who have obviously benefited from the exposure to test cricket, to having such a busy schedule. They've developed their skills nicely, and it was a historic tournament for them. They didn't even qualify in 2024, and they've come out in this tournament. They've beaten Australia, they've beaten Sri Lanka. Like, yes, Those are two teams that had very bad tournaments and definitely weren't in the best of form, but it's a huge achievement for Zimbabwe, and it's really a resurgence from them. They've got some very good young players who really performed well. They were some of the standout players of the tournament, Blessing Muzarabani and Brian Bennett, taking a lot of wickets and scoring a lot of runs respectively, and I'm hoping this is a sign of better things to come for Zimbabwe. And I think just to make the Super 8 in this tournament just makes it a very memorable, legendary tournament from them. So that's my tier list for the tournament. So the legendary, we got India and Zimbabwe. Great performance. England, Italy, New Zealand, South Africa, USA, West Indies. Solid showing. Afghanistan, Canada, Ireland, Nepal, Netherlands, Pakistan, Scotland, UAE. Disappointing tournaments for Namibia, Oman and Sri Lanka, and Australia were a national disgrace. Comment your thoughts below. Was I a bit too harsh on anyone? Was I a bit too lenient on certain teams? And yeah, I'll catch you in the next one.